In 1967, humanity encountered an alien species on Mars for the very first time, and that was also when the First War began. These aliens, whose goal was to wipe out humankind, were called the Betha. In response, humans began developing weapons to fight back. The first major battle took place on the Moon, where humanity deployed combat robots and heavy artillery against the Betha. Despite their efforts, they still couldn't stop the invasion. By 1973, human technology had advanced significantly, and the fight against the Betha continued. The aliens showed no mercy, relentlessly attacking humanity and attempting to take over Earth. Then, in 1997, in the imperial capital of Japan, Kyoto, a new chapter of the struggle against the Betha began. That day, 3 students named Aki, Izumi, and Shimeko were standing on a bridge, watching the river flow beneath them. They noticed one of their friends, Yudi, walking toward them while reading a school textbook. The 3 of them waved and called out to her. Yui smiled and walked over to greet them. A moment later, 2 combat robots flew above them, creating a strong gust of wind that nearly lifted their skirts. Yui told her friends that those were tactical surface fighters, combat robots they would one day use after graduation. The specific model was the Type 82 Zukaku, a machine developed by Yui's father. Yui and her friends attended a training academy for the Capital Defense Forces. That morning in class, their teacher explained that soldiers in their first battle against the Betha could usually last only 8 minutes. If they managed to survive beyond that, it would mark the first step toward becoming skilled pilots. While the teacher was explaining, Yui's friends were chatting among themselves. Izumi looked especially tired since she had stayed up late talking on the phone with her boyfriend. Her boyfriend had recently been transferred to Kyushu. Shimeko pointed out that everyone in Kyushu had been evacuated a year ago, but Izumi said he mentioned something about a new base being built there. Yui tried to remind them to stay focused, but before she could say anything, their teacher suddenly called them out. Yui quickly stood up straight. The teacher then asked Yui to explain what the Betha were. With confidence, she answered that the Betha were alien beings intent on destroying humanity. Suddenly, another girl, Kazusa, stood up and added that the Betha were extraterrestrial creatures not from Earth, whose purpose was to annihilate humankind. Yui and Kazusa locked eyes for a brief moment before the teacher told them both to sit down and continue the lesson. During lunch breaks, several students were seen working on assembling training robots. Meanwhile, Yui and her friends were chatting outside the classroom. They started talking about Kazusa, discussing how her family had a long history of serving as tactical surface fighter pilots rather than as royal officials. Some of Yui's friends joked that Kazusa might be Yui's rival. Yui denied it, saying she didn't see Kazusa that way. As they sat down to eat lunch together, Izumi began reading a letter from her boyfriend, but Aki couldn't resist teasing her a little. Everyone laughed, lightening the mood. One day in autumn, Shimeko and Yui were riding a bus together. Shimeko asked if Yui's father was still overseas. Yui replied that he often traveled back and forth, but even when he returned to Japan, he was always busy in Tokyo. Not long after, they saw a car pass by, an expensive one that happened to be carrying Kazusa. Seeing that, Shimeko sighed and said that families of high status should be setting better examples for ordinary citizens. Yui laughed, saying Shimeko sounded just like their teacher. When Yui finally arrived home, her face lit up with excitement. She saw several cars parked along the street near her house. Her uncle, Lieutenant Colonel Eiji, had come to visit. Yui immediately greeted him with a salute. Eiji was surprised to see how much she had grown and how capable she had become. He asked her to keep his visit a secret since his new posting hadn't been made official yet. He told her to just call him Uncle as usual. Eiji was curious how Yui had known he was there, and she explained that she noticed the security vehicles parked nearby. Eiji chuckled in disbelief, mentioning that he had specifically declined an escort. Yui laughed softly at his reaction. They sat down for tea, and Eiji shared a message from Yui's father. He wanted Yui to keep working hard in her training. Her father couldn't leave Ichigaya for the time being. Yui said she had already guessed as much and asked if it was due to an emergency situation, but Eiji didn't know the details. Yui was scheduled to begin her live training soon. Eiji explained that at the National Defense Training School, the students would practice using the Gekishin units, and once they graduated, they would be allowed to pilot the Zukaku. Both Gekishin and Zukaku were impressive tactical robots, but they still hadn't succeeded in defeating the Betha. It seemed they would need far more tactical surface fighters to handle situations like that. After hearing this, Yui asked for a chance to try one out herself. However, Eiji reminded her that while the country's defense was important, the idea of sending young girls to the front lines hadn't been considered yet, so she shouldn't rush things. Yui then asked how long Eiji planned to stay in Kyoto. Eiji told her he would return to Tokyo as soon as his work in Kyoto was finished. Eiji mentioned that he regretted missing out on Yui's mother's home-cooked meat dishes, and Yui innocently offered to cook for him next time. Eiji laughed softly and patted Yui's head before gazing up at the beautiful evening sky over Kyoto. That night, Eiji and his colleagues visited the Kubun residence to meet Yui. Yui asked why, out of all 5 noble families, Eiji chose to visit the Kubun family. Eiji said he wanted to show her something, then handed her a file containing information about a new weapon. Yui expressed her hope that this new weapon could finally bring an end to the war, and Eiji shared that same hope. The next day, Yui and her friends were in the changing room putting on their pilot suits. The suits were tight and form-fitting, which made Aki blush and say they felt a little embarrassing. Shimeko teased Amamiya, saying that a kid like her should be shy about something like that. Meanwhile, Kazusa kept staring at Yui. It was clear she really wanted to beat her. The students climbed into their tactical surface fighters and prepared their protective gear and weapons. Yui and her friends began activating their machines. Once ready, they launched into the air. Their instructor reminded them to stay as close to the ground as possible. Aki, however, flew her unit too high and triggered a height warning before colliding with a laser beam. After that, the instructor told them to switch to ground formation and engage mock enemies. The machines moved carefully, avoiding contact whenever possible, but an accidental collision occurred. The instructor declared that everyone had failed and ordered them to return to base, giving them a punishment of 10 laps around the field. Yui and her friends carried out the laps as instructed, then resumed their training. This time, they had to hold their positions and fire at targets ahead. The instructor urged them to keep fighting, reminding them that in real combat, those who gave up first would be the first to fall. During a training match, Kazusa faced off against Yui. Kazusa managed to push Yui back, and just as she was about to finish her attack, Yui countered and struck back, damaging part of Kazusa's unit. Yui then landed a clean hit on Kazusa's robot's shoulder, securing her victory. During the break, Kazusa was rinsing her hair when Yui approached and handed her a towel. Kazusa smiled and accepted it. That evening, Kazusa joined Yui and the others for a snack run. The group was cheerful and welcoming, making Kazusa feel like part of their circle. Later that night, when they tried sneaking back into the school, they were caught by their instructor. As punishment, they were assigned to clean the tactical surface fighters used in training. One autumn night, a robot unexpectedly malfunctioned and exploded. Emergency crews rushed to evacuate the injured, while several students watched in shock. The instructor told them that if they couldn't handle witnessing something like that, they might not be ready to be there at all. After the incident, a few students decided to withdraw from the program and said their goodbyes. By 1998, war had broken out between humans and the Betha on the Korean peninsula. Civilians could only watch from afar as the battles raged on. At the same time, Eiji, who was stationed at the Ichigaya Weapons and Technology Defense Center, received reports about the situation. He realized that the fortresses were eventually being overrun, and it was only a matter of time before Japan would come under attack. That night, a fleet led by Captain Izumo with Emiya among its ranks prepared to head toward the battlefield. The first officer reported that the Betha had entered the Tsushima Strait from the southern part of the Korean peninsula and that more were on their way. Captain Izumo knew their fleet wouldn't be able to hold off such a massive assault, especially since some allied ships were caught in a storm. Even so, he ordered his crew not to let the Betha reach the mainland, because if they did, tens of thousands of people would lose their lives. In July, lines of tanks fired their cannons toward the sea, trying to stop the Betha from reaching the mainland. The cannons kept firing non-stop, but the Betha continued to push forward toward land. Their attacks had already started spreading across Kyushu. That day, Izumi suddenly screamed in shock, and her friends immediately gathered around her. Kazusa came over and asked what was happening to Izumi. It turned out that Izumi's boyfriend, who had been transferred to Kyushu, had fallen in battle. Even Shimeko's cousin, who lived in Tottori, had died because he couldn't evacuate in time. Yui tried her best to comfort Izumi, who was crying uncontrollably. Meanwhile, the news broadcast reported that Betha forces from northern Kyushu and the Sanin region on the western side of Honshu were approaching the mainland. Japanese and American troops stationed in Japan were planning to join forces and form a defensive line connecting Maizuru and Kobe to protect the capital. Evacuation orders had already been issued across several regions. Only then did Yui and her friends realize that the reason their training had been accelerated was so they could soon be deployed to help. Several areas were in the process of evacuation, including Osaka, Shiga, Nara, Wakayama, Mie, and Aichi. During one of these evacuations, an elderly man suddenly decided to return to Kyoto. He believed that if the capital fell, there would be no point in fleeing to Tokyo. His family tried to stop him, but he insisted on going back to Kyoto. At the same time, the cadets at the pilot training dormitory strengthened their resolve to fight. Yui practiced with determination, Izumi couldn't stop thinking about her late boyfriend, and Kazusa seemed fired up to destroy the Betha. When the day of departure finally arrived, Yui said goodbye to her mother and family. They were deeply moved as they watched her leave. Yudi's mother expressed how proud she was that her daughter was dedicating herself to serve the nation and its people. Before leaving, Yui saluted her mother with respect and gratitude. By July 31, the final line of defense in Kyoto had completely collapsed. The 27th Recon Unit had encountered the 3rd Betha wave just 6 kilometers west of Azuru. The D-21 and A-19 Recon units had been shot down by laser attacks. At the same time, intense battles were taking place around Fukuchiyama. Because Yui and her team were still in training and lacked combat experience, their mission was to guard the Arashiyama base in Kyoto. They weren't allowed on the front lines since sending them there would only burden the other troops. Their most important duty was to protect the base at all costs. Although they understood that the decision made sense, being labeled as a burden still stung. Izumi especially couldn't let go of her desire to avenge her boyfriend's death. Suddenly, Kazusa rushed in and reported that the Betha had broken through the defensive line and were advancing toward Takagame, not far from their base. The group ran outside to see the battle for themselves. Sure enough, it looked like the defense troops were starting to get overwhelmed. When one of the mechs approached the base to resupply, it was suddenly hit by a laser strike and exploded. Yudi and the others were stunned by what they saw. Yudi couldn't help but think that the world might truly be heading toward collapse. It had been a long time since any country had even been able to count the number of casualties anymore. Then, a sudden emergency alert blared across the comms. Betha had been detected just 10 kilometers west of the base. Yui and her team immediately rushed to their tactical surface fighters. Shimeko was puzzled, wondering why the Betha had advanced so quickly and were now targeting the ammunition depot behind the front line. But Yui disagreed, saying that they were now the ones standing on the front line. The team activated their machines and began moving forward. Reports came in saying that more Betha were arriving in massive numbers. The leading force consisted of destroyer-class units, followed by grappler-class with the laser-class positioned in the rear. Yui hoped that she and her friends would make it through the battle safely. With determination in their hearts, they took off, flying straight toward the incoming assault.